Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. In my last video, I made a blue diamonds quilt. I was trying to learn how to make the diamonds out of strips of fabric, and I feel like I did that. But now I have some leftovers from that quilt. The first thing I did was lay out all my leftovers and the scraps from the blue diamonds quilt just to see what sizes I had and what I could possibly do with these. It's pretty obvious to me these scraps are not enough to make one entire quilt, but we're going to worry about that later. I had a lot of triangle cutoffs from the ends of my strip sets on the prior quilt. I decided to go ahead and square up two edges so I could see maybe if I put two of these together I could make a block. I fiddled around with these triangles a few different ways, but the best way I came up with was using that 45-degree angle that's already on my ruler to assist me in squaring those two sides. When I finished that, I laid these triangles out to see what kind of block I could make. I could put two triangles together to make a block, or four to make a bit bigger block. From the rest of the cutoffs of my diamond quilt, I made some triangles that were a little bit smaller, and then I cut some 2-inch strips, which I thought, well, I'll join those 2-inch strips together and use them for something. The first thing I did was join two of my triangles together on one of the straight edges, one of the shorter sides, to make a little bit bigger triangle. And then I'm going to take one of those pairs and join it to another pair to make a larger square block. I continued joining those triangles together into squares, and then I joined all the 2-inch strips into one long 2-inch scrappy strip. For all the blocks and the strips, I did press everything flat once I got to a good spot. For example, when I got all the 2-inch strips together, I pressed that all nice and flat, and then my square blocks nice and flat. I took that blue fabric that was left over from the border of the diamond quilt. I cut it into strips and used that for sashing, trying to at least make a row or two of blocks. Here's the first quilt row I finished, and this is all made with the triangle cutoffs and then that blue fabric for the sashing. So my challenge with the rest of the scraps you see here is to get 4 more blocks the same size. Some of the end cutoffs did have triangle shapes, but they weren't able to be squared. I would just sew a piece of that blue fabric, and then I took a strip of that 2-inch scrap strip and added that on as well, just trying to keep making this block bigger and bigger until I had the right size. I kept adding pieces and parts together until I got the size that I needed to make another 4 blocks for another row. Well, after using almost every piece of those leftovers from the Blue Diamond quilt, I've got 2 rows plus 1 little block. So now I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to make 5 rows. I'm going to make that single block the center of the middle row. Now let's see what I can pair with these Blue Diamond leftovers to complete another quilt. I really, at this point, had enough of scraps. I didn't want to go to my scrap bin. I went to my leftover layer cakes. These are packages that I have opened but not used the whole thing. And I found these pretty peacock feathery fabrics with some blues and some purples and gold. And I thought, okay, these will probably go okay with this Blue Diamond quilt fabric. I also had a large selection of some white 10-inch squares that I had cut myself from leftover quilt backing. I chose 7 print 10-inch squares and 7 white 10-inch squares. I'm going to press my white squares to give myself a line right down the middle of the square. Next, I'll place these 2 squares, a print and a white, right sides together. I'll stitch 1/4 inch line from the crease on both sides. Then I'll cut it and press the seam open. Since I'm flipping these around, I did 1 set at a time. Once I had them all cut, I mixed up the colors and then started sewing them together so that it would go print, white, and I made them all into 1 long strip that I could trim to the right size. For my middle row of the quilt, I sewed a shorter piece of this strip to each side of that 1 lone block. Well, now I had 5 rows that were more or less the same size, a little bit of trimming necessary, but it was time to decide on sashing and a border. I have these 2.5 inch strips set aside that I've cut from leftover quilt backing. I looked at this purple and I knew that my peacock fabric had some purple in it, and I thought maybe that purple would tie together nicely. I had a lot more purple strips than I needed for this small scrappy quilt, but I decided to go ahead and stitch them all together. Once I got to the end of this stack, I broke this long chain and I also cut off those little triangles, and I'll set those aside. I've really been getting into making these wonky flying geese with leftover triangles, and that's been a lot of fun for me. So I've got a little baggie that I keep just to put triangles in. I pressed those seams nice and flat, and then this was simply a matter of putting the sashing between rows and then on the 2 sides of the quilt and making sure everything was trimmed up nicely. I decided to lay it out where the single scrap block was in the middle of the quilt, that row, and then the 2 scrappy rows were next, and then on the top and the bottom would be the 2 rows made out of the 10-inch squares exclusively. So for one of those rows, I made sure and put a piece of sashing on both sides. When it came time to put the rows together, I really just eyeballed them and made sure they were pretty close to being lined up. I knew I was going to be trimming the sides later. I used clips to hold these rows in place until I could get them to the sewing machine. Once all 5 rows were put together with the sashing, I was able to trim the right and the left sides of the quilt and add the border to the sides. I did take the time after I stitched on that side sashing to roll up all the rest of that 2-inch strip. It makes a nice size little roll. I'll be able to use that in the future. Once I pressed these side borders, I trimmed the 4 corners of the quilt, and then I was done. I wasn't sure if I would enjoy the overall look of this blue and purple together, but I do. I do like it. It's bright, it's colorful. I think a kid out there is going to like this quilt. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again very soon.